All right, everyone can hear me. So nice to be here and share the Dharma with everyone. This is always such a special occasion. Every moment's a special occasion, right? So before I start, I just want to do the liturgy for opening the sutra. Excuse me. The unsurpassed and profound and sublime Dharma is difficult to encounter even in a billion eons. Today we receive, hear, and uphold it, vowing to fathom the true meaning of the Tathagata. And today we have our work cut out for us because I'm going to be talking about the Sutra of Samantabhadra's practices. And it's really quite complex. So the challenge is for me to deal with that complexity and simplify it as much as I can. But just be prepared that it go into a lot of different areas. So let's first talk about the sutra. Let me introduce it. So this is the Samantabhadra Meditation Sutra. In Chinese, it's Puxian Pusa. I'm sorry, Guan Puxian Pusa Xingfa Jing, and it seems to have been translated somewhere in the early to middle 4th century by a monk named Dharma Mitra. And it is considered the last part in the threefold Lotus Sutra. You may remember, if you were tuned in, a couple of weeks ago, I talked about the Sutra of Innumerable Meanings. That was the sutra that is considered to be an introduction to the Lotus Sutra. And this sutra that I'm talking about today is considered to be a closing sutra, if you will. And it continues with the teachings of the Lotus Sutra in a different way. So I want to talk about Samantabhadra himself. And I was just informed that today is Samantabhadra's birthday. So we're very happy, Samantabhadra. And hopefully, like Ratnasambhava, who always is present when the Lotus Sutra is being spoken about, I hope that pleases you. So Samantabhadra Bodhisattva, translated, it's Puxian in Chinese, as universal sage or universal virtue. And he was born in the East Pure Wonderland. And his form and many things were mentioned about him in the Avatamsaka Sutra. And he is the final master that Sudana, the kind of interlocutor in the Avatamsaka Sutra, speaks to. And Samantabhadra teaches him that wisdom only exists for the sake of putting it into practice, that it is only good insofar as it benefits all living beings. And Samantabhadra has a prayer of aspiration to Buddhahood. And I think a lot of people know that. Actually, it's not bad just to read the 10 things very quickly, right? So get into the spirit. Samantabhadra said that it was important to pay homage to all Buddhas, praise all Buddhas, make abundant offerings, repent all evil deeds, rejoice in the good deeds of others, request the Buddhas to turn the wheel of Dharma, that is to teach, request that Buddhas do not enter nirvana but continue to teach, follow the teachings of the Buddhas at all times, benefit all beings, and transfer merits to all beings for the sake of their awakening. So that's Samantabhadra's mission. And that's our mission here at the Chan Center, right? And one of the things I want to mention is, as we talk about sutras in general, and this specifically, is how we encounter a sutra and how we understand it. The way we encounter and read a sutra is we're reading it as a story. And there's really no way around that, especially, and the Lotus Sutra has lots of stories. But as I have said in many of my talks on the Lotus Sutra, what's important is Li, the principle. the suchness that is the sutra itself, which is not transferable to words. So when we read about a figure like Samantabhadra, it's very hard not to think of him as a character in a play, a persona in a novel, you know, some guy who does stuff somewhere. That's what we're kind of saddled with, because we are so oriented to personality and a sense of self that we look at the whole world that way, right? So that's not what's really going on here, but we have to have some way of accessing the sutra. We need an entry point, and that's how it happens. So according to Gene Reeves, he's a translator of the Lotus Sutra, universal sage, that's his translation, is the coming together of wisdom and compassion in everyday life, expressing the heart of the Lotus Sutra. So I want us to keep this very much in mind, that even though we're talking about Samantabhadra, it's much more than just a name attached to a being. And this is from the Chinese monk Mohayan. Samantabhadra is not subject to the limits of time, place, or physical conditions. Samantabhadra is not a colored being with two eyes. Samantabhadra is the unity of awareness and emptiness, the unity of appearance and emptinesses. The nature of mind, natural clarity with unceasing compassion. That is Samantabhadra from the very beginning. So, you know, how could we put that into words, right? That's a description of the immensity and the moment-to-momentness that is Samantabhadra. So before I get into the sutra today, I just want to do a quick summary of chapter 28 of the Lotus Sutra, which is about Samantabhadra, right? Everything today is about Samantabhadra, right? So it's a Samantabhadra party, right? So, so first of all, Samantabhadra appears in, it's funny to say in chapter 28, as if it's, once again, as if it's a story, but this is what we're saddled with, these kind of conventions. So he appears with countless bodhisattvas and various great signs, and he circumambulates the Buddha. He entreats the Buddha to teach how a practitioner may attain the Lotus Sutra after the parinirvana of the Tathagata, or once again, after the Buddha leaves the world. And once again, this idea of attaining the sutra, I think what we ultimately understand is that means how we become a sutra. We become a Buddha. This is what ultimately is being spoken about. So, and the Buddha explains they'll need 4 requirements to attain the sutra. One is to be protected by the Buddhas. And that's really very important. Even though we reach our enlightenment alone, but we also reach it together with everyone. It's kind of a contradiction. And we have to plant roots of good merit. And we have to enter with a group that is rightly resolute, absolutely centered on becoming awakened. And we have to awaken to the thought of saving all beings. That's kind of our basis. And Samantabhadra himself is described as a perfect adherent of 4 practices. He practices the teachings of the Lotus Sutra. He protects the Dharma teachings from every kind of persecution, every kind of danger, every kind of malevolent being. He witnesses the merits obtained by those who practice the teachings and the punishments of those who slander the Dharma or persecute practitioners. So Samantabhadra has our back, right? He proves that those who violate the Dharma can be delivered from their transgressions if they are sincerely penitent. So there's really a very positive, hopeful message in all of this. It's really very important. Then he says, whether it's walking or standing, wherever these people might be reading and reciting this sutra, I will ride a 6-tusked white elephant to that place, leaving a host of great bodhisattvas. I will appear before them and pay homage to, guard, protect, and comfort them. and thus also pay homage to the Dharma Flower Sutra. So this idea of Samantabhadra riding on this white elephant, we'll see a lot more of that shortly, is symbolic of conveying that which can't be conveyed in words, I think. So we need these symbols, and this is what Samantabhadra is showing us. And there's amazing depth in this. We just have to look deeply into ourselves and the teachings. So he will help practitioners recite and practice the sutra, and they will gain samadhis and dharanis of thousands and millions of rotations and dharanis of skillful means. And I think this means, we don't want to let words just go past us. These dharanis and samadhis are about our ability to function on many levels and to reach people. I think that's a way of understanding it. And this is an acknowledgement of the need for skillful means, because many of us are not that skillful. That's why we're learning the Dharma. So there are many things within this chapter and the sutra to come about ritual practice and about visualization. So, of course, in this chapter 28, talks about a 21-day practice of purification, where Samantabhadra will come and protect them. And I think it's important we don't take the number of days that literally, it means some kind of extended period. He gives an incantation, and the Buddha reminds those who receive it that it's due to Bodhisattva Samantabhadra, universal sages, transcendent power. Now, there's something, once again, we could read this and just go right past it. But just think for a moment, what in the world does that mean, transcendent power? What kind of experience do we have with something like this? We know people with strong personalities. We may know people who are famous, who are charismatic, but to have this ability to actually intervene in the world like that, it's really beyond most of our understanding, but it's inspiring, right? I mean, it's important to read this and not just go past it. And because the transcendent power understanding, it's just too subtle and too great for us ordinary sentient beings. And, to see how all of these teachings can create an intervention in our lives so that we can change our ways. So depending on their devotion to the sutra and to the teachings and their work, sentient beings can have very fortunate rebirths and Samantabhadra's protection. That's what the sutra promises. So interestingly enough, in this chapter, at the end of the Lotus Sutra, Samantabhadra actually appears, and he has a dialogue with Shakyamuni Buddha when he makes these above vows. And the Buddha tells Samantabhadra, you should know that if people receive, embrace, recite, and rightly bear in mind, practice and copy this Dharma Flower Sutra, they will thereby see Shakyamuni Buddha, which is no different from hearing the sutra directly from the Buddha's mouth. So that's really quite important also. So we understand that it's not just text that we're dealing with the living reality of the Dharma. And that is emphasized throughout all the sutras. So he says people will have no more attachments. They will abandon unsavory professions and not be troubled by envy, conceit, and arrogance, right? Those are things that really can hang us up. They will destroy the Mara hordes, Mara, being the Buddhist equivalent of the devil, the disruptor, and attain supreme awakening. Anyone who does this after the Buddha's extinction, remember, and this is very much on the Buddha's mind in these sutras, will turn the wheel of Dharma, beat the Dharma drum, and that's where Dharma Drum Mountain comes from, right, from this sutra. Sound the Dharma conch, the shell that's like a trumpet, and rain down the Dharma rain. He is worthy to sit on the lion's seat of the Dharma amid the great assembly of heavenly and human beings. And so people will, following this course, will have few needs. They'll be unaffected by malevolent people, and those who slander the sutra will be in trouble, put it that way. And so that ends with the practitioners receiving these very powerful dharanis. So now we're set for the sutra for today, the Sutra of the Meditation Practices of Samantabhadra. And one thing is I mentioned that Samantabhadra appears in this sutra, but he doesn't say anything. It's very interesting. He's invoked, if you will. He appears, as we'll see, on the white elephant. So he is in the Great Forest Monastery of Vaisali, and this is 3 months before his passing on, his parinirvana. And Vaisali was the capital of this, the Vajjian Confederacy, one of the many city-states that existed in the Buddha's time. So, so there's some things we want to talk about here to make a note that the Lotus Sutra, through its 28 chapters, is really centered on pretty advanced beings, bodhisattvas, arhats, not really talking directly to ordinary people. The closest it comes in many ways is speaking to teachers of the Dharma. Not that ordinary people certainly appear in many places in the Lotus Sutra, but in this sutra, it's everybody, they're just practitioners, right? Just people like you and me, a little bit more advanced, I would say, in terms of how well they're doing and their understanding. But, you know, one thing that's really quite interesting is the Buddha, through many of his lives, was a householder, just like us. It's really in this, especially in this last lifetime, as we understand the story of the Buddha, that he was a prince. But other than that, the Buddha was in his earlier incarnations, his earlier rebirths, was an ordinary person just like us. And so the sutra is aimed at all the people in Jambudvipa. That's in the sutras, the Saha world, the world of suffering that we all live in. So it's addressed to all of us. No one's left out. No one has to feel excluded in this discussion. So the sutra begins with Ananda, Maitreya, and Mahakashapa asking some very important questions, which I'm going to go over. And these are really important to keep in mind because they'll show what the sutra is trying to do and what we can take away from the sutra. So first question is, how can sentient beings aspire to Buddhahood? That's number one. How can they practice in accord with the great vehicle? Now, if anyone is just coming in and hasn't really listened to much about the great vehicle that's described in the Lotus Sutra, it's the teaching that encompasses all teachings and transcends all teachings. It's really undefinable in words, and I like to look at it as mind itself. That's what the great vehicle really is pure mind. So how can we practice in accord with pure mind? And then, so if we can ponder the realm of one ultimate reality or one truth in another translation, how can we do this with right mindfulness? And how can we avoid losing the aspiration for awakening? Remember, backsliding is often a problem for us. We make progress and then we can get discouraged. And now these last two are very important for the transcendent nature of this sutra, and which I'm going to talk about another sutra in a short while, the Sutra of Complete Enlightenment, and the chapter on, guess who? Samantabhadra. So these are the last two questions they have. How, without cutting off their delusions and renouncing the 5 desires, can they also purify their sense faculties and completely eliminate the accumulated karma of their wrongs or sins in another translation? So, and there's the way that we live in the world with our 5 senses the ordinary aspect of our lives. How do we live it in that way, yet live a Buddha life, if you will? That's kind of what the question is. And then the next question is much in the same vein. With only the pure ordinary eyes received at birth from their parents, and without forsaking their desires, how can they see things unaffected by their impediments or their hindrances? So that's the question at the heart of the sutra. So now what the Buddha introduces, remember, it's the Shakyamuni is introducing this practice about Samantabhadra, is a contemplation method, right? So the Buddha says he's already explained the one truth, the great vehicle, in other places. And the other place is the Lotus Sutra, among other places. And now he will explain the proper method of contemplation for the sake of those living beings in the future who will desire to practice the supreme teaching of the great vehicle, as well as those who want to learn the universal sage's accomplishments and to follow his practices. So he's showing many different paths that we could take. So the Buddha says, Ananda, if any monks, nuns, laymen, lay women, the 8 kinds of guardians, gods, dragons, and others, or any other living beings, all of us, recite the great vehicle, study the great vehicle, and this is the great vehicle, sutras also, really all the major Mahayana sutras in a way. And they aspire to the great vehicle, and they want to see the material body of universal sage Bodhisattva. And just a little aside about what that means to see the body. The word kaya or Shen, kaya is Sanskrit, Shen is Chinese, means body, dimension, body of qualities. It's not really to be taken so literally as if you're seeing a statue, and then that is in itself an accomplishment. It's really seeing this stuff in yourself. I think that's what it really means. So, and if they want to see the stupa of abundant treasures Buddha, this is something that first appeared in chapter 11 of the Lotus Sutra, when the great stupa rose up from the earth, and Ratnasambhava, also called abundant treasures Buddha, was in the stupa, and Shakyamuni met him. And that's the encountering of the absolute and the relative and the past, the present, and the future, everything into one mind, in a way, a rather remarkable thing in chapter 11. But they want to see the stupa, and they want to see Shakyamuni Buddha and the Buddhas who embody him. So the Buddha has this ability to replicate himself, if you will, and send emissaries to various places throughout the universe. And this also happens in the Lotus Sutra. Or if they want to gain purity of the 6 senses, eye, ear, nose, tongue, taste, body, and mind, all the 6 senses, they should learn this contemplation. And this contemplation gives blessings, removes hindrances, and it says the body of universal sage, of Samantabhadra, is unlimited. The range of his voice is unlimited. Of course, this is reality itself. And the forms of his image are unlimited. When he wants to come to this world, he uses his own divine powers to shrink his body to a smaller size. Sometimes it sounds like a science fiction movie, right? He just shrinks down and can walk among us, if you will. So because of the 3 hindrances, greed, hatred, and ignorance, of the people in Jadbhuvipa, our world, they're heavy. Through the power of his wisdom, he transforms himself and rides a white elephant. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to read a few paragraphs about the visualization. And I'm just going to read them, right? And you will understand why I'm not going to say very much about it. So in listening to what I'm about to read, you really have to relax your mind. You have to relax any idea of like, well, what does this mean? What am I supposed to do with this? How am I supposed to feel? Just listen. And I think it's important just to give you a taste of what's going on. And it's clear, it should be clear why I'm not really going to go into detail about it, but this is something, if you haven't heard this You really should. So here we go. The elephant has 6 tusks. This is what he rides on, and is supported by 7 legs. Already, it's a little hard to figure out. Under its 7 legs are 7 live lotus flowers. The elephant is as white as snow, the most brilliant of whites. Even crystal of the Himalayas cannot be compared with it. And of course, this is symbolic of just its purity. The body of the elephant is 450 yojanas long and 400 leagues tall. So a yojana in the text is somewhere between 4 and 10 miles. So let's take 5. So this elephant is 2,250 miles high and 2,000 miles long. The elephant would not fit in this room. I guarantee you, right? It's, you know, how do you even encompass that in your mind, right? So that's what we're dealing with, right? At the tips of its 6 tusks are 6 bathing pools, and in each bathing pool grow 14 lotus flowers, filling them all equally. The flowers bloom majestically, like the king of heavenly foliage. On each of these flowers sits a jade maiden with a crimson face surpassing even that of a goddess. In the hands of each of the maidens, 5 harps appear spontaneously, each accompanied by 500 other musical instruments, 500 birds, as colorful as precious gems, including wild ducks, wild geese, and mandarin ducks, are among the leaves and the flowers. On the elephant's trunk, there is a flower with a stalk, the color of red pearl. The flower itself is gold in color and looks like a bud that has not yet blossomed. After witnessing this, if you can witness this, if anyone continues to repent, and this is a key understanding of what this sutra is about. It is about repenting. It's about showing remorse, acknowledging one's past misdeeds, and we'll talk a lot more about that later on. If anyone continues to repent and contemplates the great vehicle sincerely, unceasingly ponder over it with clear vision, they will be able to see the flower bloom and radiate a golden color. So you're taking this whole thing in, and then this flower, which is like this, then as you know, will sort of open up. Now, just a few more, right? This is quite a journey we're on, right, with reading this. So the calyx, otherwise known as the flower cup of the lotus flower, is made of kimshuka jewels and wonderful and pure mani jewels. Its stamens are made of diamonds. A transformed Buddha can be seen sitting on the calyx of the lotus flower with a host of bodhisattvas sitting on the stamens. From between the eyebrows of the transformed Buddha, his orna, a little tuft of hair, comes a golden light, which goes into the elephant's trunk with the color of a red lotus flower. This light comes out of the elephant's trunk and enters its eyes. Then it shines from the elephant's eyes and enters its ears. Right, everyone with me? It then comes out of the elephant's ears, illuminates the top of its head, and changes into a golden platform. On the elephant's head are 3 transformed attendants. One has a golden wheel in its hand, another holds a mani jewel, another grasps a diamond pounder. When the attendant raises the pounder and points it at him, the elephant immediately takes a few steps. The elephant does not step on the ground, listen to this, but hovers in the air 7 feet above the earth, yet it leaves its footprints on the ground, right? The footprints have in them a Dharma wheel with a hub and 1,000 spokes, all of them the Dharma practice of universal sage bodhisattva, which is perfect. And in each Dharma wheel is a great lotus flower, which there is a transformed elephant. These elephants also have 7 legs and walk behind the great elephant. Every time one of these elephants raises and brings down a foot, 7,000 elephants appear, all following behind the great elephant. And I want you to know this kind of discussion continues for a few more pages. I just wanted to give you a flavor of it, and also we'll be able to look at this and see how you can understand what's going on without looking for the specifics. I mean, you could see how a talk, if I really were going to go and try and explain this, which I fully admit I'm not capable of doing, it would take, who knows how long, right? But I just want you to see how the sutra is constructed and what's in it. So then what happens, the perspective of the sutra shifts to the practitioners. So here's the Buddha giving this really intricate visualization and contemplation. Very important to understand that the Buddha is not saying that this is exactly real in the conventional sense, but he's describing this phantasmagoric scene, this wondrous scene. And so now we have the practitioners who are hungry for the teachings, hungry for enlightenment and for expiating their sins. He's like us, and so after all of they do vows and they do prostrations, and they see Samantabhadra on a white elephant, and he comes to them in their dreams and he teaches them the Lotus Sutra, and their minds become sharp and they see a golden Buddha, but then they can only see Samantabhadra with their eyes closed. So let me sort of summarize what goes on in the rest of the visualization things, because once again, that's very complicated. Basically, what's happening is the Buddha is asking the practitioners who are listening to him to acknowledge their sins, to express remorse for their sins. And they go through stages of, first they can see Samantabhadra, right? The great Bodhisattva. Then they can see this stupa. The stupa, by the way, is rises above the earth, thousands of feet above the earth, and it's thousands of square miles and in a square and thousands of miles high. And they can see Ratnasambhava in that. And then they can see Shakyamuni, and then they can see these embodied Buddhas. So once again, if I were to try, and I don't know how good a job I would do of like going into exactly the meaning of that, I think it would be quite difficult, but I will do it in another way. So I'm just giving you fair warning. So towards the end of these visualizations and the practitioners' encounter with them, the Buddha gives them 6 things to focus their minds on in order to purify their 6 sense organs. So to keep your mind on the Buddha, keep your mind on the Dharma, keep your mind on the Sangha, keep your mind on the precepts and the precepts in mind. Generosity, which probably stands for the other paramitas, and also of heavenly beings. And disclosure of wrongs and sincerely show remorse. So the next part of the sutra goes into the question of the analysis of the root problems. We're suffering, we misperceive the world, we make all sorts of errors. Why are we doing this? Why are we giving ourselves and each other such a hard time? It's a very good question. So he's going to go over all the 6 senses, and I'm going to just do the senses of the eyes in depth, and can get some idea of some of the others. But so your attachment to forms. So once again, in the Buddhist understanding of how our minds and our senses work, there are sense organs and sense objects and sense consciousnesses. So there is the organ of the eye, and what the eye sees are forms, sights. There's not a really good English translation of that. It works really well in in Chinese and other languages, we see images. Whatever comes in the mind is something that the organ sees. And then there's our consciousness, which is aware of the whole process. But the issue is, and the issue at the bottom of this sutra and almost all the other sutras, is our attachment. It happens in many different ways. So from the get-go, we're seeing things as if they were just outside of our experience, separate from us, and we have a take on them. So we have these senses, then we perceive them. I mean, it could be as simple as seeing a red round thing and saying that's an apple, or it could be listening to a talk about a political talk and saying, oh, that's liberal or that's conservative. We get a take on it. And then we attach to it. We believe that our impressions, which are formed in the moment on the basis of all of our conditioning and all our past experience, we believe that this is rock solid real. So we see a movie and we don't like the movie and it's a rotten movie. And anyone else who has a different opinion is an idiot, right? Because we're right all the time. We see things and what we see is absolutely right. So the problem is, according to the Buddha, that we are attached to forms. And so, but when he says attached to forms, the analysis is everything that I just said, just the way that we're doing it, which is not really that apparent to us, right? We see things instantly, we make instant opinions, and we don't know all of the many, many, many steps that happen. You know, when you see things come in through your eye, there's optical data, but you add to it visual data. And actually, in an article in Scientific American, I've mentioned this a number of times, but they talk about how only about 10% of what we see is optical data. You know, we are only reacting a little bit to what we're actually seeing in our eyes. The rest of it is the way that we're interpreting it and encountering it. So that's what the Buddha means when he says that the problem was you're attached to forms. All of that understanding is what I just said. And this has ruined your vision, right? This is defiled your vision and enslaved you to affection and attachment and aversion, right? And for this reason, you transmigrate in the threefold world, the world of desire, of forms and formlessness, the whole wheel of existence that includes us and gods and angry gods and ghosts and hells and animals. All of that, according to the Buddhist teaching, we've been in this washing machine. You know, you can see through the Buddha's looking through the window and seeing us go through the rinse cycle again and again and again. I guess the rinse cycle is the Dharma, right? We're rinsing away our our attachments. So, the instruction is to recite the sutras of the great vehicle and understand, and this is really important, this part here, the forms and the bodies of the Buddhas are never extinguished. So there is a, you know, once again, use words like reality and unreality, and those are kind of unreliable words, just with that caveat. But there is an underlying unchanging reality, which allows for all the things that are changing. It's really beyond most of our understanding. That's why we just had a retreat here of stillness in motion. So there is stillness in motion and there is motion in stillness, right? Seem to be a total contradiction, but not from the Buddha's point of view. So I'm told, not being a Buddha, right? So the unwholesomeness of your eyes, one translation of your no good eyes, has done you much harm. So take refuge and tell your mistakes and errors caused by your eyes. And so the practitioners say, please employ the Dharma water of your wisdom eyes to wash away our wrong and purify our vision. So the practitioners, so there's this give and take in the Dharma with the people who are practicing and with the teachings. They hear it and they are vowing to follow what the Buddha said. And so once again, in the sutra, it does a detailed analysis of the ears, how what we've heard has caused us to suffer much and to cause other people to suffer because we misheard. And remember, in the Buddha's precepts, there are 4 admonitions about right speech, just speaking about communication, because we can get it wrong. We can lie, and we can be abusive, and we can be divisive, and we can just exaggerate. There are all these different ways that what we hear or what we think we hear can lead to problems. And it continues with taste and smell and sensations of the body and the thoughts that we come up. All of these things have set us astray. So up until that point, this sutra could almost have been from the Pali Canon, really talking about the defilement of our senses. And it's an analysis that has continued throughout the history of Buddhism. But this is the final sutra, or the ending sutra of the whole Lotus Sutra. So the teachings are really transcendent. So now we get to the heart of the matter, what the Buddha is really talking about. This is the non-dualistic teachings. So what I'm going to do is go over those, and there's also a verse in the sutra, which I'll be going over the same thing, but I think it doesn't hurt to hear this in a number of different ways. So a voice calls out. Oh, that's another interesting thing in this sutra. There of course, there are bodhisattvas, but there are also voices from the sky that come out of nowhere. Right? So here's a voice that calls out that Shakyamuni is called Vairakana, present in all places. And his abode is eternally tranquil light, composed of the paramita of permanence. Right? And then the sutra actually gives what's called the 4 inversions. Now, people who've studied basic Buddhism know that we have the teachings of suffering, of no self, of impermanence, and impurity. That's what we're dealing with according to the general teachings. But here, and also in other sutras, especially the Nirvana Sutra, it talks about true self, right? True purity, true bliss, and true permanence. Really quite the opposite of what we would think. And that Shakyamuni's abode is everything from suchness and tranquility of liberation to the paramita of wisdom. The abode, where he lives, where he is found, are in these pure teachings. And these material forms, remember, they're forms, that we're not denying the material world, are ever abiding, and you should contemplate the Buddhas. And then it says the Buddhas in the 10 directions will extend their right hands and lay them on the practitioners' heads. And that's symbolic of the acknowledging the teachings kind of touching us, I believe. And they'll recite the Great Vehicle Sutras, and we Buddhas will expound the method of acknowledgement and remorse. So that's one of the things that's importantly taught in this sutra, of acknowledgement and remorse, or repentance in some other translations. So then it says the bodhisattva practice is neither cutting off the binding of illusion nor sinking in the sea of delusions. So we're not caught in duality of reality, non-reality, right and wrong, good and bad, long and short, me and you. We're not caught in those dualities. And this merely arises from no thoughts. And it arises from illusions just like the wind through the sky, with no foothold in space. So this is a vision of absolute freedom, of being, of unbinding. And inherently, such attributes of things are neither produced nor extinguished. So this is, as it says in the Heart Sutra, not born, not destroyed, not impure, not pure, does not increase or decrease. That's what we're talking about. This understanding of the absolute, the truth of the Buddha. So then it asks, what is an offense and what is a virtue? Now, this is where, once again, where the sutra is heading, right? So we have these ideas in our minds. Oh, it did that. That was terrible. Oh, I helped this person cross the street. I'm really, really wonderful, right? Because I did, have these attachments, right? And so what is an offense and what is a virtue? Since our minds are themselves emptiness, the nature of our mind is emptiness, offenses and virtues have no host. There's no place, they don't exist anywhere. So it is with all things that do, so it is with all things that do not abide or perish. So if we perform acknowledgement and remorse in this manner, you observe that the mind is not mind, and see that among all things, there is no thing that abides. Things are continually changing. All things are themselves liberation. They are themselves the truth of extinguishment. They are themselves tranquility. This is the state called great acknowledgement and remorse. It is called acknowledgement and remorse free from attributes of wrongs. It is called the destruction of mental consciousness. Consciousness here being understood, I think, as the way we filter our awareness and we hold on to things. And I think that's one thing that is kind of part and parcel to ordinary consciousness, is that there's a kind of holding on to things, concepts and identity and a variety of things. Those who practice this become pure in body and mind and do not become stuck on things. Wouldn't that be nice? To get stuck on things? Just like flowing water. In every thought, in every moment, they will be able to see Samantabhadra and the Buddhas in 10 directions. And, we have to figure out what that actually means. I haven't quite had that vision, I would say myself, but I'm open to it, and an understanding of boundlessness. So the world honored ones emit the brilliant light of compassion. We see that wisdom and compassion are one and the same. They expound the teaching of all things having no fixed form. And we find this also in the Platform Sutra, the formlessness, right? They will hear the foremost teachings on emptiness, and their minds will be astonished, right? Everyone's mind astonished, right? Make sure. Okay. Not afraid, right? No fear. And they'll attain the state of true bodhisattvahood. So they're really on the path. And so the Buddha tells Ananda after his passing, if disciples want to acknowledge and express remorse, just read and recite the great vehicle sutras, which are the eyes of the Buddhas. It's a really interesting phrase, something worth contemplating, right? By these means, the Buddha has perfected the 5 eyes. And they're there's our flesh eye, the godly eye of the arhats and bodhisattva, and the Buddha's eye, which is unobstructed, and the Buddha has access to all of these different modes of perception. 3 kinds of bodies are born from these expansive sutras called Vaipulya sutras, which are the seal of the great Dharma that attest to Nirvana's oceans. And these 3 bodies, I'm not going to go into it here, we know are like the form body, reward body, and the manifestation body, and the Dharma body, the Dharma of all phenomena. This is born from these teachings. And these 3 kinds of bodies are the fields of blessings for human and heavenly beings, and are supremely worthy of offerings. And I think when they talk about offerings, it means in the deepest sense, our attention to them. are turning away from the things that are making us very unhappy and making other people happy, and averting our attention and concentrating on these teachings. Now, that's what I think offerings mean. In another place, the Buddha says there's a sutra from the Agamas where some devas want to make offerings to the Buddha, and the Buddha is between two solid trees, and they make the trees blossom and bear fruit. And the Buddha is not pleased by this offering because it's the wrong time for the solid trees to blossom. And he says, the real way that you make offerings to me is by practicing the Four Noble Truths and walking on the Eightfold Path. That's how you offer to me, the Buddha, because there's no one to offer to when you offer to the Buddha, right? You're offering to yourself. Those who read and recite these sutras of the Great Vehicle themselves perfectly possess the merits of a Buddha, and forever extinguish their wrongdoings and are born of the Buddha wisdom. So now what I'm going to do is just read. This is a verse that comes towards the end of the meditation on Samantabhadra's practice, but I think it's a good recapitulation of everything here. So I'll just read this and make some comments before I talk about the final subject in discussing the sutra. So here's the verse. At that time, the world-honored one spoke in verse, if you have evil in your eyes, impure with hindrances from actions in the past, you should recite the Great Vehicle and reflect on its first principle, which is the principle of mind only, or many ways of interpreting it. This is called eye repentance. It exhausts past actions, past bad actions. When the ear hears noise, the principle of harmony is upset. This produces craziness, like that of a foolish monkey. You should recite the Great Vehicle and meditate on the emptiness and formlessness of things, to exhaust all evils for a long time, and hear sounds from all directions with heavenly ears. The nose is attached to sense. In accord with its contamination, contacts occur. In this way, the deluded nose, there's an image for you, a deluded nose. The deluded nose, in accord with its contamination, gives birth to all kinds of entanglements. The Dharma practice of universal sage Bodhisattva, if you recite the Great Vehicle Sutras and meditate on the reality of things, you will long be free from evil actions done in the past and not do them in future lives. Very important, right? The tongue causes 5 kinds of bad consequences, from harsh words spoken in the past. If you want to control it yourself, you should make an effort to practice compassion. Think of the meaning of the true quiescence of things abiding in tranquility, and not conceived by making distinctions. Also very important. This is where we're caught up with our senses, by choosing and picking. The mind is like a monkey, never resting for a moment. If you want to subdue it, you should make an effort to recite the Great Vehicle, keeping in mind the Buddha's great awakened body, his power and his freedom from fear. The body, master of its organs, dances freely among these 6 harmful faculties. So there really is a way to be as we are, which is sort of what was in the original question of Ananda and Mahakashapa, right, and Maitreya, right? So the body's master of its organs dances freely among these 6 harmful faculties without obstacle, like dust swirling in the wind. If you want to be rid of these evils, long separated from dirt and trouble, ever in the comfort of nirvana and at ease with a calm heart, you should recite the Great Vehicle Sutras and keep in mind the mother of bodhisattvas. Innumerable excellent skills will be obtained by reflecting on the true nature of things. Reflection is very important. The Dharma practice of universal sage bodhisattva, these so-called 6 methods, purify the 6 sense organs. The whole ocean of hindrances from past actions arises from illusion. If you want to repent, you should sit upright and reflect on the true nature of things. And all sins are like frost and dew. Very important to hear that. The Son of Wisdom can dissipate them. For this reason, with your heart, you should repent of the six senses. Now, I want to go into two things to sort of wind up the talk. One, I want to address what happens in these visualizations that I spoke about. And which I said on the surface of it, for most ordinary sentient beings, and I certainly include myself in that, it's very hard to understand what is happening when someone can first see Samantabhadra and then can see the stupa and then can see Shakyamuni and then the embodiments of the Buddha. So I'm coming up with a theory here, and I'm basing this theory on very solid teaching, so I'm not too worried. Whether it's applicable to this sutra is something you can think about. But I just want to talk very shortly about the Sutra of Complete Enlightenment, because in the chapter on Samantabhadra, Samantabhadra asks about illusions, and we're going to talk about those even in a little bit more depth. And he's talking about how can you use illusions to conquer illusions. It's very, very interesting. And the Sutra of Complete Enlightenment talks about one kind of the highest concentration called Samapati, which is everything, it means everything even, everything, all things looking the same, so that the calming of the mind, the insight of the mind, all take place within the ordinary world. That's what Samantabhadra is. It's also understood, my understanding anyway, of illusion fighting illusion. And I think you can see this even in the work with koans, and we're going to talk about Tantra in a moment. But I want to go through the, so in this particular chapter, the Buddha is talking about true unbinding and the stages that we have to go through. And I'm just wondering if perhaps it has something to do with the visualizations that we encountered in this sutra. So here in the Sutra of Complete Enlightenment, the first thing that you do, and none of these are easy, by the way, but it's part of our path, is detach yourself from worldly phenomena. Right, not easy. Don't give up everything, but you keep a distance, so to speak. You detach from your body and the situations around you. But when you reflect upon what is seen and experienced, there is still attachment to a mind that perceives and discriminates. So the mind still exists, but that's quite something if you can reach that first stage. Then, so what's happened is your mind has seen that it discriminates, right? And so you're not discriminating anymore, but you still have a mind of discrimination, knowing that you're not discriminating. I know it sounds kind of strange. In other words, you still think there's a difference between discriminating and non-discriminating. So you detach from the mind of discrimination, still clinging to the idea of self that avoids attachment. So you've gone from the stage of detaching from the things around you. You're not throwing them away, but you're no longer so involved with them. But you've gone through this thing where you're recognizing that, and it's pointing, that recognition is still faulty. You're still caught in that recognition. So you're trying to attach from that. Now you're attached to a self that avoids discrimination. It almost sounds, it's almost sounds like it's nitpicking, but the holding on that we do is very, very deep. And what this sutra is talking, this is the Sutra of Complete Enlightenment. So it's talking about complete enlightenment, the Buddha's enlightenment. So you detach from a self that avoids, as subtle as that can be, but you have no problem with attachment or non-attachment then. But you can still have this sense of what's called stubborn emptiness. And it's a view that negates everything. So you're somewhat caught in that view of the sense of annihilation, the two kind of things we can fall into, eternalism and annihilationism. You're quite free, but you still have a certain negativity in you. And the last realm is total freedom, absolutely no attachments. So it is Samantabhadra's birthday, so at least I get in another plug from another sutra about him. And so, and there's once again, you can read Master Sheng Yen has a book on the Sutra of Complete Enlightenment, which is quite wonderful. Now I want to talk a little bit about Tantra, because Tantra is a practice of associated with Vajrayana, which is not my practice, not the practice of the Chan Center, but it's undeniable that it's in this sutra, all of those visualizations with the elephants and the lotuses and whatever. This is something that would be well understood in the Vajrayana tradition. Now, I am fortunate enough to have a Kalyana Mitra, a very good friend, who was an ordained monk in Vajrayana for 7 years. And so what I'm going to talk about now is my conversation with him and how we might look at the whole sutra and what's going on in a different way, and understand these visualizations and where they're coming from. So one of the things start with is we're learning from the sutra so far the extensiveness of our karma. And I define karma, karma can define it many different ways, but I define it as anytime you're interacting with what your mind is producing, as opposed to what's actually happening in reality. So that's karma. We can see how extensive it is. And so once we acknowledge this pit of karma that we've fallen into, how do we release ourselves from this pit? And the sutra uses this term remorse and acknowledgement as a key pointer towards getting to the exit from the pit. And the sutra has also pointed out to us that the practice is neither cutting off the binding of illusion nor sinking into the sea of delusions. So we're as we learned in that brief encounter with the Sutra of Complete Enlightenment, we're withdrawing from this mind that is attached to anything. We're seeing from mind itself. So in Vajrayana, we usually speak of 3 different levels of teaching. And this is a doctrine that's very highly developed in a teaching, a school of Vajrayana called Mahamudra. The first level of the teaching is the so-called sutric level, the level of the sutras, right? The second level is the tantric level, or the esoteric level. And the third level is the teaching of the essence level teaching. These 3 categories are used to analyze where a teaching fits in terms of what a student is experiencing, right? What kind of effects will a teaching produce on a particular student, right? This is one of the things about skillful means. We don't give the same Dharma food to everybody. People have different needs and things that they're attracted to and repulsed from. And also where are the errors from misunderstanding the teachers, where are these likely to go if you get the wrong kind of teaching, getting the wrong kind of, with the wrong kind of result? So So let's go through them a little bit more deeply. So the sutra level teaching is a teaching which takes up the fundamentals of how you get to be able to acknowledge and work with these meditative techniques of shamatha, calming the mind, and vipassana. This is something we're very familiar with in Chan. The combination of those two are silent illumination. And they're also active in working with the breath, reciting the Buddha's name, and working with Watto. These are universal kind of constants in Buddhist teachings. So you have a calm abiding, and you have special insights, and that's like vipassana. And then there are deeper levels of concentration. They're called manaskara and apramata. Basically, you're really trying to pay attention to what's there and not what your mind is feeding you. That's really what they're about. So what you can start to see the interconnections between a moment of thought and the moment of thought that preceded it. And from when you start to see these discrepancies, you can start to see that there were underlying motivations in the way your thoughts are arising. So, the greed, the anger, the ignorance. And that's at these deeper levels of concentration. And that's seeing how the mind operates as in its continuous flow. And you go deeper and deeper with this kind of analysis. So sutra level teaching handles these techniques of meditation and the results and all of the ways that we can encounter them, the sort of the mechanics of meditating. How does the mind work? Why does it work the way it does? What do we do about it? All basic, but very important. So the tantric level in the teachings is the next level up. This is in the Vajrayana scheme of things that says that people won't accept the straightforward explanation of how their mind works. I think this is really important, right? You can tell people, and I mean, anyone here who's been practicing for a while probably knows that people have told you fairly straightforward, direct things, and you sort of say, that doesn't make any sense to me, right? You're not ready for it. So the Vajrayana sort of understands that, and sometimes a teacher, a student who's attracted to the tantric teachings will see all of these bells and whistles and dances and visualizations and special types of mantras and empowerments. And this is what they need. And so what the tantric practice does is it works with our natural tendency to be attached to things, right? In a sense, instead of breaking out from this thing directly, you're more going with the flow. And of course, a lot of what Vajrayana practice is talking about is looking at the underlying energies of our negative emotions. So, so the glamour, hype, the advertising, the jokester, all of this stuff is draped around the teachings. So it's very attractive looking. It really draws people in. And then people start to pay closer attention. And because they're now paying attention and kind of savoring these attachments, it gives them a vantage point and a special ability to see through the attachments, right? So the attachments are not given there as gifts for you to take home and put on your shelf. The attachments are something you work with. That's what tantric methods are about at the generation level and the completion level, and it's throughout the teachings. And once again, I'm giving you this explanation from a Vajrayana practitioner. And this is why Samantabhadra is showing up as a tantric deity. So we can understand that the visualization is letting us do the visualization and then become aware of how it affects us and how we see through it. So, but the thing is, on the tantric level, people get charmed and devoted, and they actually develop a kind of confidence that all this immersion in something other than what they know is real in their lives. And this glamour side is the promise of Buddhism. And then, there are so many images of, and you see this in the Lotus Sutra, by the way, palaces and necklaces and stupas and armbands and crowns and variety of jewels, all of which are, I guess, are possible. But not only but it's a bit superficial, and it's not really necessary for a person who's really able to look directly at this kind of thing. And of course, you don't get so caught up at this in the sutra level. So as my friend said, sutra students who just need to be told how the mind works and what to do about it, they find skillful ways to use the mind for appropriate mind results. But if you were to give them all these tantric bells and whistles, and it would be like a bad acid trip, or a good acid trip for that matter, they're going to say, this is crazy. This is just so laden with attachments. I mean, it's all these crazy things. What's going on? They'll come to the conclusion that that's not my understanding of Buddhism, right? So that student will look at all this tantric level stuff and spit it out like poison. For others, this is, I want to see the thunder and the lightning. This is motivating me. And this is what will move them at a certain point in that kind of practice. And then the third level is the essence teaching. So this is raising a question, and this is really very interesting and important. Is the sutra just a conjuration? Is it a magic show? Right? I mean, and this is fundamental to Buddhism, even from the early teachings of the Buddhism. The Buddha said, look at me as if I were supposedly gold, assay me, see if my teachings really work. So on any level, is this sutra made up, a magic show, a conjuration? And so what am I actually experiencing? So, so this leaves behind the sutra level of the teaching. We don't need any of these effects. We can see the whole thing. We see right through things. This is really the level of Chan, by the way. This is at the essence level. And I just read, a simple way of putting this, I just read this anecdote of a teacher who has had a disciple for many years, and the disciple claims to him, said, Master, you haven't given me any teachings. So the master says, when you give me tea, I drink it. When you give me food, I eat it. When you bow to me, I bow to you. What other teachings do you need? Right? It's right here. This is, not in words, not in scriptures, a teaching that points to the mind directly and shows our true nature. That's what the essence is. So at this level, you see right through the whole conversation. And so we're not sure it is a conjuration, a magic show. We're not sure it isn't, right? But this is really very powerful. And what this really points to is a very important aspect of the practice in Chan, which is the doubt sensation. Actually, this is a sensation that helps us move away from our normal mode of attaching, because we are questioning everything in the mind, which we can do through Wato, we can do it through silent illumination in many ways. So, and this doubt is not in opposition to faith. That's very important to know. We don't rely on confidence or anything. What we rely on is the raw, unalloyed truth. And, we ask, is that all there is? Is this just a conjuration? So with these three levels, you get a little bit of a feel of how this sutra might work in all of this. It's got a little bit of everything in it. So that these visualizations, which, I read them, they're kind of baffling. They're interesting, right? But, we don't really know what to make of them. But if we see them as aids to our practice, if we read the sutra and we look deeper, they can be very helpful. And we can see that compassion is clarity, clarity is compassion in how we encounter these things. We see what comes up in our mind, we examine them, we don't attach. So let me see. Well, it is, and all right, so the real important thing and the takeaway from this sutra, I think, is to understand this level of acknowledgement and remorse. When most of us think about karma, I don't know if we really know that we're thinking about this, but we think of karma as like some force or some God out there that's watching what we do, is, knows when, like Santa Claus, he knows if we've been good or, nasty or good. But karma is really about how we're dealing with the projections in our minds. So if we understand what the sutra is really telling us about repentance, we'll see that the most important takeaway is that we can transform in a given moment. So I was talking to my friend about this, and I said, I don't know, what if I killed 3 people? I have not killed 3 people, just want to make sure, but so don't send the police after me. So what if so he said to me, are you planning on killing any more people? No, right? So sort of there you go. So you recognize that all of the pain and all of the negative results of your actions. And so this is kind of, the repentance is not so much that you're trying to empty out bad karma, and whatever you think about that is kind of another thing, but that you're turning your life around in this moment. You're acknowledging everything that's happened, but you're also, by acknowledging it, you're not holding on to it. That would be kind of counterproductive. So we can see how, as an end to the Lotus Sutra, this sutra of the meditation practices of Samantabhadra has really set us on the path of practice with a variety of methods, and there are many things we can use from the Lotus Sutra. But it's really giving us this formless teaching, this non-dualistic teaching, this way of recognizing how everything is created by the mind. And that is that is certainly the path to liberation, and liberation itself, once I guess you have really cleaned house, so to speak. So, well, anyway, I did, as you can see, this is really quite a, it's quite a trip of, so we celebrated Samantabhadra's birthday. We can blow out all the candles on his cake. He has an infinite number of candles on his cake, by the way. It's going to take quite a lot. And so I talked about the chapter 28, where Samantabhadra kind of makes his vows to protect people, and this sutra, which continues with the visualization of Samantabhadra in many different ways, and how we can look beyond our normal 6 senses. And I brought in the Sutra of Complete Enlightenment, the Samantabhadra chapter. So this, like any other Dharma talk, could be a start of, looking in deeper into these kinds of things. And let me go back to let me do this liturgy for closing the sutra, which I have way at the top. What, excuse me? Yeah, for questions, let me just may the virtuous merits adorn and purify the pure land of the Buddhas. Upwardly, we repay the 4 layers of gratitude. Downwardly, we alleviate the suffering of the 3 destinies. May those who see and hear the Dharma generate Bodhi mind. Exhausting this body of retribution, may we be reborn in the land of extreme bliss. So, all right, so if any of you blissful people have questions or comments, please, the floor is open. Yes, please.
The supernature's phenomena or also visualization describes in the Sutra.
Mhm.
Are they all elusive and false?
Are they all illusions?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, that's,
I mean, even the Pure Land.
yeah, well, also yet we have to be honest with what we know. I mean, we may be Pure Land practitioners and we believe in it, but we have to be clear of what we've actually experienced. Oh, thank you. Tell me more. I'm not sure I really answered your question.
Well, that's pretty good, though.
Okay,
You know?
all right.
Well, and the question is I'm talking about the desire. You know, I mean, desire is the root of the suffering, right?
Right.
All right. Desire also have a good and bad. Also, Bodhisattva, they have a desire. They want to deliver the other sentient being.
Right, but their desire is not based on their self-interest.
But that's still desire.
Well, it is,
Right.
no, one can certainly talk about it as desire. One analysis of the difference between the early teachings and Mahayana teachings is that our situation as sentient beings in the sea of suffering is we're always trying to desire things, and some things, and we're trying to push away other things. And one narrative of this is when you reach full enlightenment and you become a bodhisattva, you're doing the same things. You're desiring and you're pushing away, but you're no longer doing it for yourself. Your interests have widened to all sentient beings. But you're absolutely, and it's not something to just be dismissed. Your question is very important.
Yeah,
It really is.
It's also attached with the being, you know. Anything you have attachment, now it's also elusive too, you know. It's not really the you know, the core teaching from the Buddhahood. I mean, also Buddhahood is a mention about the self-natures and the Buddha's natures.
Mhm.
Everyone possesses the Buddha's nature, but it contradicted to the core teaching of the Buddhism. Is everything is emptiness. Everything is from a dependent origination. So
Yeah.
how you can describe this self-nature?
Well, first of all, also a very good question. I think one of the things that's can trip us up is that we get lost in definitions, right? And we take the definitions to be really real. So we can say that a definition of Buddha nature might contradict the store consciousness or the Tathagata Garbha, and it might contradict this and might contradict that. The thing is, it's really what's in your heart, right? What's at the core of your being is like the core of the earth. It's not so accessible, but it's certainly nothing that could be described in a 25-word sentence. But once again, what I think you're doing, what you're asking, and your kind of inquiry is really quite good. This is about what the real doubt is about. You're not resting on just what comes into your mind. Every time you get to a point, you look deeper and you say, okay, oh, I put this together and I put together that together. And it's like Master Sheng Yen said, oh, this is not my final destination. Oh, I seem to have an insight. What people often say, oh, I had this insight, I must be fully enlightened. And, you could just be fooling yourself. So thank you. Thank you for your question. Yes.
Yeah, we have another question from Vijay. Vijay, you can unmute yourself.
Hey, Harry, thank you for the talk.
Hey, VJ.
Good to hear from you and the depth of your Lotus Sutra language, and enjoyed the talk so much. I just wanted to thank you first.
You.
And I have a comment and question. So the first comment is based on your talk earlier this week on chapter 24. I calculated the height of Buddha constellation flower wisdom on 24. It came down to 364 billion feet because he was 84 million yojanas. So I just, based on something that you mentioned, just multiplied and did the conversion. So that Buddha's height came up to 364 billion feet. What a trip.
Make sure I have a lot of food if I invite him for dinner.
Not that Bodhisattva wonderful sound was any shorter.
Yeah.
He was around 3 years. He was 3,100,000,000 feet. Anyway, you opened me up to something very weird, though. Thank you.
Sure. Well, just keep exercising the keto diet. You never know.
Great talk. By the way, about Samantabhadra, do you see the fifth vow? The Samantabhadras, out of the 10 great vows, do you see the fifth vow and the 10th vow as the two opposite sides of the same thing? Because it sounds pretty much the same. I was just wondering, I was just interested in what you thought about it.
Let me just, the 10th one is to transfer all merits to all others, right?
Fifth one is to rejoice in the merit of others.
Oh, well, it's funny you bring that up. I once went up to Shifu when we would always transfer merits. And I told Shifu, I really feel guilty about doing this because when I transfer merit, that's a meritorious act. So I'm really sort of, it's a bait and switch. I'm transferring merits, but that's really such a great act. So I got merits. Do I transfer the merits that I just got from transferring the merits? Right? I was very confused. Yeah, too much thinking. I agree. So of course, what I think the understanding is the transfer of merits is like sharing the flame from a candle. Your candle is lit and you light another candle. It doesn't mean your candle is extinguished. So it's really spreading out. So these things are always good to catch, Vijay. But I don't think it's a contradiction.
Wonderful. Thank you, Harry.